Hi there folks, it is Jo the Crafty Crofter, and today I'm here with a little quilting patchwork using up your scraps video. I'm not a quilter as such, but I do really enjoy using up all of my spare bits of fabric and using them to create something that I gift to friends and for special gifts and presents. I made my first quilt in 2014. It was really amateur and I just really loved just putting together some bits of fabric that people had given to me. I had some old pillowcases from the children's bedding and bits of fabric that I didn't just want to waste, so I sewed them together and made them little quilts that we used to take camping. I made two, one for each of my daughters, but I really didn't understand how you bound a quilt, how you turned it inside out. I made it so that the quilt topper and the lining were sewn right sides together like I was used to in clothes sewing, and then I tried to turn it out and it was all lumpy and bumpy, but it was for my children and they simply loved them. I then decided that I'd like to use up some more of my scraps, so I can say I've never really ever bought fabric to make a quilt with. Quilting and patchworking is the outcome of using up and keeping my scraps moving. I've never been online and tried to match up fabrics or make a selection as such. I've always just used my own eye with all of my bits and pieces and put them all out and put them together. In 2017, I thought I would maybe do a little bit more of this quilting, and I understood a little bit more about how the layers of a quilt came together. And I had a little craft group at the time of friends and neighbours who used to come to my house, and we all made a quilt block a week, and we tried out lots of different techniques. And it's here that I realised that I just really love sewing scrap pieces of fabric together. I didn't particularly enjoy measuring them, sewing them together with really accurate seam allowances. I didn't want to have to think about what colour went where, or that I would have a piece the wrong way around. I just love sewing bits of fabric together. I did try to go back to some patterned quilts just because I had some solid colour fabrics that I wanted to use up. So I was really trying to find a pattern or design in quilting that meant I could use all of my pattern fabrics and my solid colours at the same time. And I made this 8-pointed star quilt, and that was for my friend's daughter for her 18th birthday. I did have to be a little bit more accurate there, but I did sort of start to learn that the more accurate you were with your seam allowances, the better the outcome. I still didn't want to be perfect. There was something in me that just still wanted to keep sewing bits of fabric together. As I put more pieces together, I then started to learn a little bit about putting colours together. So on the 8-pointed star, I just used random fabrics. And for her sister, I made another one, which I called the rainbow quilt. And there I put together squares, but I had an ombre effect of different colours. So the colours went through pinks, through yellows, greens and blues. And I realised that actually colour placement was really quite a good way of using up my scraps too. I still didn't want to buy specific fabrics. I still wanted to keep using up my scraps. Another style of more traditional quilting that I tried was a half square triangle, but again I needed to be really accurate, and because I was using up scraps I hadn't always quite cut the fabric on grain, so sometimes that diagonal line through my square was a little bit stretched out of shape. But again, it was all part of the learning process because I realised that you needed to be quite accurate when you're quilting. And I made this quilt. It was for our spare bed, and actually it used to be there in the guest bedroom, and I kind of got to love it in the end, even though when I looked at it, I could see that some of my half square triangles weren't going the right way. And that was when I realised I just wanted to not have to keep looking which piece went where. That felt like a huge jigsaw. I just wanted to sort of build a quilt and for it to be a little bit more organic. The more clothes I made, the more fabric I was getting in my scrap bins. And again, I'd got to a point where my solid colours and my fabrics with print on were starting to get full in the boxes. And then I did my favourite quilt that I've done actually so far. I think it's a quilt called Lucky. I called it Lucky because I was lucky enough not to have to buy any fabric to make it with. And I made it during a quite difficult time in my life where my dad was really ill, and I just didn't have the bandwidth to sew clothes and fit busts and hips and waists, and I just wasn't prepared to put myself into a place where I was going to get disappointment through my hobby. So I started to cut out all of my solid colour and printed colour fabrics into this star design. I used a template. I found that was easier than trying to measure bits of fabric, which I wasn't very accurate at, and I soon lost interest. And I started to put this quilt together. And at times when I was feeling really, really overwhelmed, I just used to go into my sewing space and just sew straight lines. And actually, sewing straight lines gave me lots of room in my mind to process lots of other things. And actually, my dad never got to see it, but it's a quilt that me and my partner now we have on our bed, and it's so wonderful. I absolutely love it. It's bigger than king size, so it was quite a large piece, and I also came to the conclusion I didn't like machine quilting either, because my brother's sewing machine has a really small aperture. I didn't want to particularly go and pay for it to be quilted, so I just hand quilted it. I got some pearl thread, a long needle, a thimble, and I just used to sit and hand quilt all of that together. On the back is our old IKEA bedspread, so it's sort of a topper attached to a regular quilt. I cut off the binding of the regular quilt and then I put new binding on the outside. So it kind of works really in a way that I've used up fabrics, I've used up things that we already had, and I really, really love seeing it when I go into the room and the light streaming in. The other style of quilting that I found that I really enjoyed was the crazy quilt style. So my friend's two daughters had turned 18 and they both had a quilt, and her son was going to turn 18. And I wanted to make a quilt that was suitable for an 18-year-old. And it was really great actually, because I'd used up all of my floral bits in the two girls' quilts. And I had ones that were spotty, had birds on, or houses, or stripes, or checks. And I started to put together a quilt for Henry. And my friend actually gave me some of his shirts and some of his dad's shirts. So those were all part of the quilt, and then it became quite a really enjoyable memory quilt too. So I put these blocks together, and when I made the first one, I thought, I don't really like this, it's not really working. But when I started to stick them to the wall, then I started to see the total craziness of them. And I thought that Henry would really love it. He was really into science and things, how things worked, and how interesting they were. And I knew that he would find how all of those pieces joined together to be really curious. So this is how you can make a crazy quilt. If you're not into measuring or being really accurate, it's a really good way to use really small pieces and strips of fabric. I've delved into my Liberty box to start a quilt. This is my first block actually out of Liberty fabric, but I know that crazy quilts means that it doesn't matter if I keep adding different prints and different designs. I haven't got to work out where one piece goes and where one piece fits. I can just keep sewing strips together. Here's a little bit of sewing for you to enjoy. So this is the box that collects all of my Liberty scraps, and when I say scraps I do mean quite small. So this one is down to 5.5 centimetres in both directions, and I've got some that are cut on the grain as strips and other pieces that I'll need to cut on the grain. I've got a little throwback here from my last video. This is my daughter's little girl's dress, and it was before I had an overlocker, and look at that beautiful raw edge turn that I used to do when I didn't have an overlocker. This one is from a top that I had, which no longer fit me anymore. So I've just been cutting up bits and collecting bits of fabric and putting them in this box. When I'm quilting, I take my normal foot off and I use a 1/4 inch foot. It's not so critical for the work that I do because mine's quite random with seam allowances, but you start your crazy quilt by matching up the raw edges of one of the sides of the square. You need to press as you go, and then you're going to add your next strip to the next side of the square. It needs to go across the square and across your newest piece of fabric. It doesn't matter if it's a little bit longer, you can cut it off as you go, and then you can add a strip to your next side of your square. Cut off any excess and keep working until you've done every side of the square, and any small bits you cut off can be made into the next square to start the next block. This is the last side now, and you can see it's getting a little bit inaccurate. This one's too small, so I'll keep that one. This one's a little bit too long. This one's just right. I'm not measuring, I'm just adding to each side. And then you want to turn your work so that you add the next one and keep turning clockwise and adding a strip to each side of your new square shape. I put a safety pin in here just in case I stop or I get interrupted. I know which way I'm turning next, so it acts as a little arrow marker. The fun is in the choosing, so you just keep adding strips to each side of the square. I've got a nice setup here with my press mat and my iron so that I can keep pressing and keep everything flat. If you wish, you can cut all your strips the same depth, but I just like to keep adding different sized pieces as I go along, as and when I find one off the pile. This one's a little bit long, so I'm going to keep that for when the square gets a little bigger. You want to use the scraps as best you can so that you're not cutting off bits and creating scraps. And I'm moving the safety pin along so that I know the next direction of turning. I have only one quilting rule, which is I don't like having two fabrics touching each other. So if I put this one here, I'd have a bit of a chunk here of that same print. So I want to switch out for another piece. Although I'm not measuring, I am trying to work with the grain of the fabric because I don't want the block to twist. So I'm just cutting that one a little more on grain. I am a little short on the end, but I'll show you what I'll do with that. This one's a little bit short in the corner, but I can problem solve that by sewing this one here with a little more of a shallow strip. And the centre is starting to drift out of the centre, but it really doesn't bother me. I like to have these strips just going round and round, and I can add a thicker strip if I want. All the seam allowances on the back are pressed as you go, and you can snip the threads also. I want my squares to be about 12 inches. So here I'm starting to just measure a little bit. I don't want to put a great big piece of fabric on and then have to chop it off. So I'm looking now for my final piece, which will give me my 12 by 12 inches. As the strips get a little bit longer, I do add about 2 or 3 pins just to hold everything in place. I think this one is looking about right now. I want to square this up because I haven't done any measuring. So I've got a 12 by 12 board. I can put that on top and rotary cut around the outside and put any largish strips back into the strip box. Here's my finished block, and that's all the scraps that I'll be putting into my scrap bag. It's quite an easy one to pick up and put down. As you create scraps, you can put them into piles. I've put mine into size piles, ready to pick off for the next block. They all go back into the Liberty scrap box. I think this is going to be a really gorgeous quilt when it's finished. I like giving quilts as a gift, so this one that I made was really simple. It was just all of the green fabrics that I had, anything that had plenty of green in it or a bit of green. I put them together to make a big picnic blanket for my nephew and his wife when they were getting married. They had a camper van, and that's what they were going to do for their honeymoon because they got married at the end of lockdown. So I made this quilt topper, and it was actually really quick to make. I just put all the squares together in strips and join them up. And I gave them to a wedding present with a flask and something to drink in their van in the evening. And they said they really loved it because when it cooled down in the evening, they sat in their chairs and they wrapped the quilt around them. And they'd also used it as an extra layer in their camper van, and they'd used it on the beach for a picnic. I really started to enjoy using up the strips out of the box, so I made a strip quilt. That's really easy. Again, no measuring, you just sew strips together and then you're going to cut the edges off if you want to do that so that you get uniform pieces to join together. I made one of these and I didn't know who it was going to be for. I just thought I'll keep that for a next gift. And then my cousin got married, and so this one was his wedding present. I'll show you how to make the strip quilt. It's really simple. Again, it's a little bit like the crazy quilts, but this time you're working in vertical stripes rather than going round and around. So in the strip box go fabric that when I cut it off, I cut it into strips and I just throw them in here. When it gets a little bit full, I have a sort out. So these ones are all longer strips. So these would all be sewn as one long strip, because I don't want to mix them up. This is the next size, this is the next size, and then I've got some smaller pieces here. Let's take a look at the smaller ones, just a little bit easier for me to sew with you. There's only one rule, and that is that the same fabric won't go next to each other. I do try to find opposing colours. So you can see here, this one isn't the same length, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to keep one end a little bit accurate and the other end will be grossly inaccurate. You can use a 1/4 inch foot, or you can just run the edge of your foot along the sewing machine, because you're not worrying here about seam allowances, because as long as you've got an expanse of fabric showing, then it really doesn't matter. You can press as you go. It's not quite as critical as with the one going round and around, because you can just take these to the ironing board when you've got a few in place, get it nice and flat, and then return. They're not all the same fabrics. This one is a quilting cotton, this one is a lighter cotton, this is a sea salt cotton lawn, this one is a cotton poplin. If you want to wash all your fabrics, you can. I have never done that before because I'm not really washing my quilts, I just hang them outside. Fabrics I avoid in this are double gauze, viscose. I want things that have a cotton matte finish, but you can really choose whatever you want. Sometimes if I'm getting too many greens together, then I might add one to the other end. So I was sometimes working off both ends of the strip. I've actually looked at that selection of fabric and I don't like this one. It's got black in it and the rest of my quilt doesn't have any black in it at all. So I'm just going to cut that one off. I don't want that one. And the key to this is to having lots of different colours and lots of different fabrics. So once it starts getting a little bit repetitive, you'll start to dull down, and I'm seeing that I need a few more vibrant colours in there. And I haven't got any more in this strip length, so I'm going to go to one of my scrap buckets and cut some strips off in some colours that I would like. So I've gone into the patchwork box, which was nearly full actually. Picked out a few pieces that I can cut a little strip off, and I'm going to use some of these and just lift and lighten these colours here a little bit. I don't use any special thread, I just use some of my moon threads, and I do sometimes have different colour on the top and the bottom, and I use it as a way to empty a bobbin before I rethread it with the correct colour. So that one's going to be in a quilt pretty soon because it's the last bit of bobbin from something previously. So I'll use that in my quilt, and then that will be empty to refill for a garment match. Once I've got a strip or lots of strips in the box, I can then square them up, and I use the gridded mats to match up the lines and make sure that I'm getting everything square. Just weight down the end and use my ruler and cutter. I'm getting a little bit of a discrepancy there, so I can tidy up the ends as well if I want to. And then I'm matching up along the grid lines again and trimming the other side. You can do this as full length strips or in little portions that you add to over time. They're not perfect. You can see here that some of them are not straight. Here, this one's kinking down a little bit and this one's at a slight angle, but it all adds to the mix. I hang them all on a coat hanger. Once I've done that, I don't want to overhandle them. You can cut them into thinner strips if you want to. Got quite a big one here, so I'll be cutting this and maybe turning it in a different direction and making sure that the fabrics are all distributed over my quilt. This is the one I'm working on at the moment. I was starting to get to the end of a lot of my scraps. Towards the end of 2020, I had really run all of my fabric down. I'd been using everything that I had at home, And so I only had really small pieces of fabric left, but some of them were such lovely pieces that I didn't want to get rid of them. So I embarked on a postage stamp quilt. That's where you use really small pieces of fabrics. And I made those in blocks. So each block had 64 pieces in, I think. And then I used to take them to the wall and make another one and another one. I really loved them, just all the tiny little bits of fabric that I'd really loved and enjoyed. I put this together, and this one took me a lot longer, but I didn't mind because I was just using little bits. Sometimes I never did any sewing. I just used to sit down if I wanted some headspace and just cut tiny bits of fabric and drop them into a tin. Then when I had some sewing time, I would sew a few together and slowly make the blocks. And when I'd made enough blocks, I put them all together to make a postage stamp quilt. This one is for my goddaughter. That's the last child of my friend. And this one has a little plate on it with her date of birth. I do put that on all of my quilts, and it says all the little pieces of you, because I've known my goddaughter from the minute she was born as a home birth, and I've known her all the way through her life. And for her 18th birthday, she had a postage stamp quilt. So I was busy making all of these quilts for all of these different people, and then I thought I'd better make a start on one for my oldest daughter. So this is the most recent one that I finished, and I wanted to make this one as a sort of ombre effect. So I wanted to use up all of my different colours. I'd made that one, 10 years ago, where I thought about how the colours moved through the quilt. So this one was quite small pieces. I just cut a card template, and I just cut out lots and lots of squares by cutting around the card, join them together. There's not all perfect points at the corners. That really isn't for me. As long as I got them all together and I got them in the strips, that's what I was really aiming for. It's a little bit short of yellow fabrics, so I put a call out on our WhatsApp group from the social that I attend, and it was fantastic because everybody bought me some little bits of yellow fabric and put those through the quilt so that I could go through the whole rainbow. I love this quilt. It has bits of her school uniform in it, it has bits of pyjamas in it, it has bits of fabrics that she's made her own clothes with. So it's a really lovely narrative of how she's been a crafter through her life too. The strip quilt that you saw me working on there, where I gave a little demo, is part of this quilt that I'm making for my second daughter. She's 16 at the moment, so I've got a couple more years to go on this, and I keep adding more and more strips. And again, from the social, there's some really talented quilters there, and they give me all of their tiny little bits of offcuts, so it just keeps the colour vibrancy in this quilt. And this is the one that I'm making for my second daughter, so I've got a little bit longer to go on this one. You can use these strip quilts in lots of different ways. So you can have the strips going across, you can have some going across and then a few going down. You can do all sorts of things. Once you've put them into strips like this, you can cut them and turn them and make it as crazy as you want. I really wanted to share my quilt journey with you here, because that's what I keep in these little buckets, and that's been part of our scrap chat that we've been having over the last couple of blogs. And I really wanted to share that if you think that quilting takes ages, it's costs a lot of money, it needs to be really accurate and perfect, I really want to blow all that out of the water, because I just really enjoy sewing scraps together. And okay, the edges might be a little bit wobbly, but I get my ruler out and I get a rotary cutter and I square it all off at the end, and it always works out just fine. I'd love to know if you're a seasoned quilter, an occasional patchworker, or an aspirational quilter. All of those things can be in our mind all of the time, and you do really need to think, if you're saving scraps, are you actually going to make a quilt or not? And if not, it's probably best to bundle them up and give them to somebody who really would enjoy having all of those different fabrics to mix in with a quilt. Hopefully from today you've seen that there's lots of ways that you can use up your scraps, and it doesn't have to be a perfectionist accurate measuring quilt. You can just put some fabrics together and really enjoy yourself. My final scrap vlog will be about all of the tiny bits that you really don't know what to do with. They're mixes of fabrics, they're mixes of fibres and base cloths, and they're not going to fit into this kind of scenario. You've tried using them up in different garments on the insides and using them that way. Really is the bag of scraps. And I'll show you what I've done with mine and a few other people's in my next vlog. Until then, have a great week.